Hi everyone, and welcome to the Odinic School of Mysteries. My name is Bear. How's everyone doing? I'm glad you're all here, actually. It was kind of a bit of a stressful morning, so I'm kind of looking forward to sitting down and visiting. I'm going to pour myself some delicious coffee here. Hope you don't mind. I encourage you all to also pour yourself some delicious coffee so that you could fully enjoy our little I guess you call it podcast now, because we have a podcast. We will have, I'll put the link to it actually down below if you're interested. It's, because again, I'm poor. It's a freebie, so I can only upload 3 things a day. So I'm kind of trying to get things uploaded as I can. But it's kind of going to take about a month or so probably to get everything up. So you'll probably find this episode and some others up there right now. Not many up there yet, but there's still some. So, yeah, this is we're a podcast. We're official. We are super. We're super moving along. Trying to cast as wide of a net as physically possible. So. Here we go. A few episodes ago, we talked about the question, "What is a right?" And there was 2 gentlemen had really good questions, really good follow-up questions about that, and I thought it would be a really nice thing to actually just take a look at it and answer these. Normally we do this. I do Q&A once a month, the first week of the month, and typically I answer questions and stuff during that time. But these are pretty good questions, and I'm feeling pretty generous, I guess. And so I thought that this would be kind of nice to sit down and we'll talk some of this stuff over. So Mr. Linux Noob asks the question: if doing the actual right thing is the right thing to do, then why does it take so much effort and forethought? This is actually a really good question. Because you're right, it's not super obvious. This isn't something that you'd think that it would be like doing the right thing would just be super easy. However, there's a lot of, like I say before, there's a lot of, how did I put it? Excuse me. There's an assumption that all the things that are going on in your mind all come from you specifically, right? That all the voices and the different opinions and the things you have, all those things that are bouncing around in your head, all those voices, all those opinions, all those wills and wants, all come from you. However, what people don't understand is that you're not just you in there. There's a number of things that are going on in there. You're a pantheon of voices, and each different voice wants its own thing. So, and I don't want to overcomplicate this, but really what you could say is that you have, for simplicity's sake, you could say you have the ego, which is basically the consciousness of the body. And then you have yourself, and then you have all the consciousnesses of the different life forms that exist within you, gut bacteria and that sort of thing. So for now, we'll just say you have the 2, for simplicity's sake. We'll say that you have your voice and then you have your ego, or the consciousness of your body. And so all of these things, even external forces, even you could even say like the frost giants and other spirits and stuff, all have access to your consciousness. And so the question becomes, which one of these consciousnesses is you? The reason doing the right thing isn't always easy is because doing the right thing rarely, it seems like, is actually a pleasant experience. And one of the things about the ego is that it does not like suffering. It likes the easiest, most comfortable path humanly possible. It does. The ego is the thing that wants you to make a lot of money, to not do any work, to lay around and be fed, and have as much pleasure given to it as possible for the least amount of work possible. And so, and I say that, and it's a little bit, I guess, misleading, because, it depends on what the ego wants, really depends on the person, right? Some people, they love working, they take a lot of pride in their work, and so the ego is really wrapped up in their job. So it's not necessarily work, it's effort, right? If it derives pleasure from something, that is really what the ego wants. And so when it comes time to actually doing something hard, to actually doing the right thing, it takes a considerable amount of effort because, well, frankly, doing the right thing isn't always expedient, right? Sometimes you have to you have to tell the truth, even though you know that it's going to make your life a lot more complicated. So, like the question is, if you have a secret and let's say you did something naughty, right? No one's ever going to find out about it. No one could even test for it. You could just get away with it scot-free, right? But if you came clean and you told the truth, it would upend everything. Would you still tell the truth? If telling the truth is going to hurt your family, if telling you the truth is going to make you lose money, if telling the truth is going to affect all these different facets in your world, well, it's easy to look at that and say, well, maybe avoiding telling the truth actually is a better option for me than doing the right thing. And that is, in my experience, doing the right thing kind of falls under that kind of category a lot. Sometimes, okay, so I don't feel like I'm doing an adequate job explaining this. The things that we do that we would say like is the right thing to do. The things we do that are like that most often are things like charity and that sort of thing, because they make us feel good. We do them specifically not because it's not unselfish. That's what I'm trying to say. We want to do the right thing. We want to give some money to the homeless person because we say it's the right thing, but we're doing it for selfish reasons. We're doing it because it makes us feel good. The part that's hard is when doing the right thing requires a tremendous amount of self-sacrifice. Like the thing I was just mentioning, where doing the right thing actually causes you to suffer. Actually causes other people to think of you differently than they did before. And that's the true metal being tested there. That is the person who is truly going to have is truly putting on his big boy pants and doing what is necessary to do the right thing, even at the cost of his own, um, his or her own personal comfort and stability. And we find it that the ego doesn't want to do that, right? It's difficult. It's painful. Who wants to do that? No one does. I certainly don't. Do you want to upend your whole life? But, sometimes that's just what it takes. Sometimes it's just, buckling up and doing the work that's necessary. Like I said in the last show, we tend to look at our lives, and we still have a very Constantinian view of reality, where we're only here for just a few number of years, and then life effectively stops, and then you either go on to heaven because you're a good person, or you go on to hell and you're a bad person. But really, what counts is this little small section in time. That's a very Western view of things. But when we come to a lot of those ancient religions, coming out of India, Egypt, and some of these other more ancient religions, life doesn't have a beginning or an end. It's a long, long story. So the experience you're having here isn't really the full picture of what's actually going on. So a lot of times what we end up doing is we have this calculation that happens in our head. We say that we live in this really short period, so therefore, only because we're only here for a short time, it's easier and more productive for me to just lie and get out of it than have to suffer the consequences in this lifetime, right? Sometimes that's the way we think. When in reality, the ancients, and I am of this opinion, are long-sighted when it comes to life. They don't see life as a short thing. It's a very long process. And even so, like, we come to the Eastern idea of karma, which I'm not fully bought into, but I'm not against it either. I should say I'm not fully invested in the classical version of karma, I guess, and like the way that is interpreted in the New Age movement. Where if we remember that everything is a tone, everything makes sound. Actually, an easier example would be like throwing a pebble in a pond, and you see those ripples kind of ripple out throughout the pond. And some of the smaller ones dissipate really quickly, and the bigger ripples last a very long time. And so the things we're doing now, the things we're suffering now, are in all likelihood consequences for decisions we made a few lifetimes ago. So you really have to, I'm not an advocate of treating karma like a bank account, which a lot of people do, where they fuss over to do right and wrong because they're worried about the karmic blowback. I suppose if it makes you a slightly more tolerable person, I suppose it's not the end of the world. But I don't believe in micromanaging your karma. However, it is worth noting that you never actually get to save yourself the trouble. You never actually do. By trying to take the easy way out, we actually find ourselves getting kicked in the teeth in the long run, whether it's in this lifetime or in some other time and place. It's actually easier and more expedient to just get it over with, do the right thing, and suffer the consequences now than ages from now. And that's my personal opinion. And that's why doing the right thing takes some effort. And and doing the right thing isn't always super obvious. Like I said, we sometimes it takes some thought, right? If all evil is theft, sometimes it takes a little bit of work to kind of figure out whether or not something is actually theft or not. I used the example a little while ago about the taxation, and why I came to the conclusion that taxation is theft. And the way it's branded, like I said before, is that we're all in this together. We all need to pitch in so that we could all have roads and schools and all of that. We all live together. We should all pitch in. But that's not really what happens, though. If that's all taxation was, if it was saying we should all pitch in, that would be fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's when threats come in, right? It's when you say, give us your money that you worked for, or else. If you don't, then we're going to steal your freedom and lock you in a cage. We're going to take the money out of your bank account. We're going to fine you and force you to pay us even more money. We're going to make your life as hellish as possible until you give us what we want. And that's when it becomes theft. So on the surface, when we first approach one of these problems, it doesn't seem super obvious that something is being stolen. But when we kind of start working through all the facets of what happens when, like the process of, we'll say, taxation, we start realizing that it does become theft at a certain stage. Maybe not right off the bat, but it does eventually become that way. And then, you have other geopolitical stuff like war and immigration and abortion and just all these hot button topics that are going to totally get my video deranked by even mentioning the words guns and all this other stuff. It takes a little bit of effort to go through and say, okay, is this a theft or not? Because the easy stuff is easy. We could all agree pretty quickly that that stealing is wrong. Right, or that murder is a theft. We could all agree that murder is a theft. You're stealing someone's life. That becomes easy. But then you have other questions, right, that are more difficult to answer. Like, I was actually thinking about this the other day, and tough questions like. Oh crap! I forgot what was the word called when it's about nuclear war, and you strike first. What is that called? That's called it's when you're afraid someone's going to attack you, and so you attack first. I forget the word. I almost had it too. Anyway, I don't want to dwell on it. But yeah, that is, so you have to ask the question, is that a theft? Am I actually protecting myself by doing that? Is that, so you kind of, things get kind of tricky, but it's worth the thought. It's worth spending the time to think about these things. Because it's not easy. And ideally, ideally we want to do these things because we want to do them, right? We want to be good people. We don't want to be like the animals. And, you know, I'm probably not going to make a whole lot of friends by saying this, but I personally think that most people in society, people in aggregate, I'm not saying everyone is like this, but I'm saying most people in aggregate are really basically just high-functioning animals. Animals with guns, basically. They fight over the same shit that animals fight over. They do all the same shit that animals do. There is no reason for thought. There is no concern about morality or what is the right thing to do. They have no desire to really do the right thing. They just want to do what is expedient for them and their families. And so ideally, we want to get to the point where society wants to be good people. Where society wants to be good people. But we aren't really there. I would say I think a lot of people would be bad people if they felt they could get away with it. You know, if someone knew that they could get away with murder, I would say that we would probably have a great deal of the population more than willing to commit murder. But that is my personal opinion. And maybe I'm just being a little pessimistic today. Like I said, I did have a fairly stressful morning. So I'm not in like the best of moods. So maybe I'm being a little more ornery than I normally am. But that's just kind of my thought. If you're someone who, it's kind of like, I heard someone say this once and it stuck with me. They said that if you're worried that you're not a good parent, you're probably a pretty good parent. Because good parents worry about being good parents. And I think it's kind of the same thing with this. Like if you're really concerned about morality and doing the right thing and not stealing from others and all of that stuff, I think chances are probably pretty good that you're a good person. At least you really want to be a good person, even if you don't have all the mechanics down. So that's that. I'm sorry if I'm a little scatterbrained today. So Zeether asked this question. Seether? It's either Seether or Zeether. I don't know. What does the universe do when you don't do the right thing and know it is the right thing to do? So what does the universe do when you don't do the right thing and you know it is the right thing to do? So that's a really good question too. So what he's saying is, if you know something is wrong and you do it anyway, what does the universe do? So that is a kind of a toughie, to be honest. Sorry, hold on. Ooh, knocking stuff over. Okay. Trying not to destroy my entire setup here. That's always a unique trick. So let me think about that. There seems to be a little bit of grace that is given to people who don't know better. Right? And that's not to say that they don't suffer because of their ignorance. That's not to say they don't suffer because of their ignorance. There was a guy I knew growing up who would get drunk. And when he got drunk, he got angry and would start yelling. And the cops would keep showing up at his house. And for the life of him, he couldn't understand. He couldn't figure out why the cops keep showing up at his house. And finally, I was a kid at the time, but my dad asked him, he was like, you realize that the cops don't just show up at people's houses. There's reasons why the cops are showing up at your place all the time. They don't just show up at my place all the time. There's clearly a reason why they're always at your door. He had honestly never thought of that. Right? So, due to his ignorance of law, the laws of cause and effect and the repercussions of his actions, the cops keep showing up. He keeps getting hassled. His wife leaves him. He loses his work. He's not trusted in the community. And so he looks around himself and says, why does all these bad stuff keep happening to me? He's ignorant about the causal factors of all these things. He's lives in ignorance. He doesn't understand that he's violating laws and he's getting these blowbacks from that. You violate law, you suffer the consequences, even if you're in ignorance. But there seems to be a little bit of grace that is afforded to people who don't know. Who don't know. When it comes to things like morality, we don't hold all things to the same standards, or the gods don't hold things to the same standards. If my dog Lily, for example, goes and steals the cat's food, right, she doesn't have a higher level consciousness. She doesn't have forethought, really. She just has impulse. She will not be judged the same way as you and I will. We are held to a higher standard because we have a higher consciousness. And, I've mentioned this before. There's a little tongue-in-cheek phrase that's used in, at least the mystery school that I'm a part of, called the curse of knowledge. We get more knowledge to set ourselves free, but the more knowledge we have, the more responsibility we get. I used another analogy really recently just to rehash old shows over and over again. I was like, when we were children, we look around at the world around us, and when we're children, and we think how unfair it is that our parents get to go to bed whenever they want. They don't have a bedtime, and they get all this money every month, and they can eat ice cream for dinner if they want to. It's not fair. Us kids, we have to go to bed at 7:30 and be forced to take naps. Oh my stars and garters. How horrible. You have to lay down and take a nap. That is just the worst fate imaginable. And children, they look around and they are naive to the world, and they're innocent, and they think the whole world is as they see it and perceive it. And they think it's not fair that adults have all this freedom. But is it true that adults have all this freedom? No, it's not. We work obscene amount of hours, and all the money we do get immediately goes to rent and food and power bills and all of that. So all the money you do get is, even if it's in the thousands of dollars, is immediately gone. You don't actually get to enjoy it. And, what children don't see is the tremendous amount of responsibility that comes from being a grown-up. And likewise, as conscious beings. As our consciousness grows and we get exposed to new ideas and we start learning new things, it is true that we get set free. It is true that we could avoid a lot of the pitfalls that other people have to suffer through. It's true that we become master players. We could see the whole checkered board floor of the House of Solomon. We could see where all the pieces are laid out, and we could avoid all these really dumb pitfalls, these really dumb karmic things that cause problems. There is a member of my family who dates married men and can't figure out why her relationships always end badly. You know, this doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand why this is a bad idea, but she doesn't figure it. She can't figure it out. With a higher consciousness, you could avoid those things. You could understand why that would be bad. So, with that said, knowing better, we don't get afforded any of those benefits, I guess you could say. And this is a tricky one because there's not really a really fantastic answer. At least not one that makes things clear and clear cut. But there seems to be, if you know better, there seems to be, you're not spared any of the blowback, right? There is even an argument, I suppose, that you could argue that what you're doing is you're stepping into self-theft. And self-theft is, again, we don't, like when I say sin, for example, I don't think of it as the Judeo-Christian version of sin, which is, you sin, God hates you for it, and you're going to burn in hell forever because you've stole a candy bar, right? I don't see sin that way. I do believe you burn in hell metaphorically, meaning you have to suffer the consequences for stealing a candy bar. I believe in that, and you have to pay for that, creating that tone in creation. However, it's not a permanent thing. It's just a debt you have to pay off. If you're going to borrow, you have to pay back. And so the argument could be made that if you know better and you do it anyway, it's a self-theft. And the reason self-thefts are bad is because they're a multifold sin. Remember what I said about sin and how I see sin. They're a multifold sin. When self-thefts are, it takes a special kind of person to steal from themselves. And it takes a special kind of ignorance to do that. And I use the word ignorance very specifically because of its root meaning, which is ignore. Ignorance. To ignore something. So it could either mean, ignorance could either mean the information is there and I choose to ignore it. I choose not to learn it and thus stealing from myself, or I already know the information and choose to ignore it, thus stealing from myself. For instance, so a lot of you know I'm on a diet. I've lost almost 60 pounds. You could go back and see my earlier videos. I look very plump. Anyway, if I, knowing what I know now and, getting my health under control and all of this stuff, if I went and decided to start just not having a splurge day, which is usually fine, you go and have a piece of pizza and something with your family. But if I just said, fuck it, and I go and eat 8 pizzas and drink all the soda and eat myself till I'm sick for days on end, well then that's a self-theft. Because not only am I doing something that I know is harmful to myself, thus stealing from myself, but I'm also choosing to ignore the knowledge that I already possess to do it. And so you kind of get hit with a double whammy. And there's a pretty good argument that can be made that if you're doing something wrong, even though you know it's wrong, that it is actually a self-theft, and therefore you kind of get the double thwack from the karmic blowback from that, because you're not just striking the bell once, you're striking the bell multiple times. Does that make sense? I hope it makes sense. My goal is that it makes sense. I don't want to make it too confusing. Coffee is good. I was going to make myself some bacon this morning, but I forgot because I kind of hit the ground running. So, morality is a tricky business. And it's one of those things that it is, how do I put this? I'm not an extremist in the sense that I think concerning yourself with this full time is healthy. What I mean is, I don't think it's worth the time to really just fuss over morality to the point where it becomes an obsession, because that is also a problem. It's like it is possible to love God too much. It's possible. Just like with an alcoholic, if your obsession with God takes you to the point of destructive behavior, then you love God too much and you got to back off. If your obsession with morality makes you an alcoholic, so to speak, and you're so afraid of doing something wrong that you don't do anything, and that you start freaking out and panicking and all of this stuff, I don't believe that's healthy. I think just having it in your mind and just kind of understanding these principles and applying them when necessary, I think that's a much healthier way of going about it. With that said, I'm not someone who believes in moral relativism, which is kind of the opposite end of the spectrum. I think there is moral law, a very cut and dry moral law that needs to be followed. And in that sense, I guess you could say I'm an extremist. That's not really a good way of putting it. The extremist isn't a really good way of putting it, I suppose. But moral relativism is that morality. So the reasoning is that if man is an animal, morality is therefore a social construct, and so what is right and wrong is just whatever I say it is. Right? And that's where moral relativism comes in. So then I could say, if I'm a moral relativist, well, murdering you, I think, is actually going to be a good thing to do because you're annoying me. And so because you're annoying me, and I believe you shouldn't have the right to annoy me, So therefore, I'm going to murder you and get you out of my hair. Or I'm going to steal your stuff because, you know what, I can. That's more moral relativism. And that's the one of the biggest, I would say, ideological differences between the stuff that I talk about and, say, like the Church of Satan, which is, this is kind of part of their ideology. Now, again, I need to state for the record that the Church of Satan is an ancient religion and has just been recently rebranded as Satanism. Right. It's not what people think it is. It's an ideology more than it is a religion. And if you're someone who believes that they worship an externalized deity known as the devil, you're sorely mistaken. They don't. They don't. I've explained it on numerous occasions on their belief system. I don't really want to do that too much today. But needless to say that moral relativism is one of their biggest tenets. Self-preservation is their highest law. And whatever it takes to make you the most comfortable and to acquire the most amount of power and wealth for yourself, so be it. Whatever serves you is the highest law. And that's really attractive to people. Right? That kind of ideology is really attractive to people. And frankly, it's a lot easier to do that. It's way easier to do that than it is to say, well, is it theft? Well, no, if it's theft, I can't do it. That's so much harder. The path I walk is so much harder than a lot of the other paths offered out there. Because where the other paths are the aggrandizement of the ego, where you are God, you should be worshipped. The self needs to be worshipped. I am God. I sit in my throne. I declare myself to be God. That is, that's so much easier than killing your ego. And that's one of the very hardest things for initiates. That is one of the very hardest things for initiates, is to murder the ego, to get rid of that thing, to get rid of the thing that says, I have to be right at all costs. And because people, they want to be gods, but without the responsibility, I think ultimately is what we're dealing with here. When it comes to morality, when it comes to all this stuff, they want the power of God, but without the responsibility of God. And that is a very human attitude to have, but it's not reality on the ground, unfortunately. You don't get to have both. Power and responsibility are conjoined twins. There is no separating those two things. Power, it's like the overused Superman line, with great power comes great responsibility. I would argue that power and responsibility. Hey you guys, sorry about that. Yeah, my wife is on her way home apparently. So it's already, the time is getting along pretty good. So I think maybe we should think about wrapping this up. So yeah, like what I was saying is that people, they want to be God, but without the responsibility of God. People, just like as children, they want to be grown-ups with all the benefits of being grown-ups, but without any of the responsibility. You know, my son, he wants the freedom of being like dad, but when I tell him to pick up his Legos, well then, suddenly the world is ending. You know, I don't want that responsibility. Well, you know what? It's either you who picks it up or it's me, and I'd rather it be you. And so that's kind of the interesting dilemma we have with this. So I'm really glad I'm really glad that you're here. I really appreciate you coming. And I want to say thank you to Mr. Linux Noob and Seether for your questions. Those were really good questions. And I love it when someone asks a really good question. And, you know, when you ask good questions, you know, sometimes they turn into videos, because it's like, when you're in here and you're sitting in front of a microphone and you're just talking, sometimes it becomes, you can't always tell the blind spots. You know, you don't always get to hit all the points. And so it's helpful when people are engaging and that sort of thing. I want to remind you that we do have a podcast set up, and not everything is up there yet. To be honest, I'm not sure if I'm going to keep. At first, I was thinking that I was going to upload all of my video content up there. I'm not sure that I'm going to do that. I think I might upload some of them, uploading the video content as audio files. I think what I'm probably going to do is just start uploading from now, when I have adjusted my format to accommodate podcast form, which is a lot easier, to be honest. Doing the video stuff, the audio versions of this kind of thing is a lot easier, but it's not as, personally, I don't feel it is quite as intimate. You know, like I don't feel like I'm really talking to somebody. Like when I'm looking at like I could pretend that my camera is a person and I'm talking to you like a person. When I'm just, when I'm just talking into a microphone, it doesn't really feel as intimate and close. So we'll do some experimentation, and we'll just kind of see how this goes. Right now, I'm still kind of learning and trying to find my footing, and so some things will change and some things will stay the same. We'll just play it by ear. Please like, share, and subscribe if you don't mind. The more ways you interact with the video, the better. It tells YouTube that people like this content. However, this content is not user-friendly when it comes to YouTube, because YouTube hates this kind of thing. It has a spiritual bent. And YouTube doesn't like this kind of thing. I'm thinking about doing a video on subliminals. I'm not someone who does a lot of stuff for, I don't do a lot of stuff like Jacob Israel does. Like a lot of you, I'm sure, are aware of my friend Jacob Israel. He does a lot of conspiracy theory stuff and a lot of that kind of stuff in modern, whatchamacallit. I don't really, even though I am interested in that kind of stuff a little bit, it's not really my thing. It's not really what I built my content around. But I am thinking about I'm thinking about doing a video maybe on some subliminal advertising and hiding of occult symbols in pop culture. And I don't know. I haven't decided yet. Maybe I won't. Who knows? So I love you all. Thank you so much for being here. And I really appreciate you taking the time to do it. That really means a lot, that you are willing to bear with me as I try and find my footing and figure out my way around all this stuff. And, I'm not a technology guy, and so I'm learning all of this stuff from scratch. And so I really appreciate the love and support. Thanks again to Mr. Linux Noob and Zether for the questions, and I look forward to talking to you all later. All right, you have a good day. Bye-bye.